Whoever is bitten by a werewolf and lives becomes a werewolf himself.
You don't understand what's going on. I understand, all right. You're one of the undead, and I'm a werewolf. Something out there might be eating people.
Woo! Woo! I am a werewolf. Scary. Hello. Today, I'm gonna talk about some werewolves. Werewolves have been a very, very long-term, obsession of mine. I find werewolves super, super fascinating, and the history and mythos behind them sheds a lot of light onto how we perceive our very existence as humans. Werewolves are really fascinating creatures, and the actual mythos of them has changed a lot over the years. So today I'm going to dive into the weird and the wonderful, and just kind of like the strange lore and history of werewolves and why I like them so much. We're also going to cover some cool werewolf media that I've viewed in the past, as I have kind of made a silent goal of mine to cover and watch every single piece of werewolf media that is out there right now. So sit in, grab yourself some silver bullets, just in case, and grab some snacks, get ready for a video. The history of werewolves is very vast and strange. There's been a lot of debate, there's been a lot of different iterations and forms of werewolves over the years, both in media and actual historical mythos, if you will. The very, very, very first mention of anything close to lycanthropy or werewolves originated in ancient Greece or Rome. I forgot the king's name, but it was some king or some dude that was cursed to be part wolf. The idea of werewolves has existed for a very, very long time all over the world, particularly in Indo-Europe. Indo-Europeans were very, very, very big on the concept of shape-shifting. There was a lot around shape-shifting, and particularly werewolves, all over Europe at that time, and there was a lot in France and Russia about werewolves. The idea of werewolves has generated very, very secular in different places at different times, but it's all consistent with the idea of man who is part wolf. A big point of contention is whether or not the wolf happens at full moon, whether they change into a wolf, or whether just permanently half man, half wolf. All of this is up for contention, but the main idea stays true. Half man, half wolf. Werewolves were very, very, very common as a concept. I don't know why, but I think it's very, very interesting that consistently this idea has popped up. And it makes sense that werewolves are actually a massive allegory for a lot of different stuff throughout history, which I will cover later in this video. It's important to note that most initial cases of werewolves were used to explain mass murders. Gruesome, grisly mass murderers. Initially in France, one of the first werewolves was a man who murdered children and women. The sort of concept of a man being so predatory and being so horrible really bled into mythos with the concept of werewolves being pushed. And I think it's really, really interesting that that's mostly where werewolves came from. The original allegory for werewolves talked about the secret brutality of man, the horrid, murderous sides that people can have. I think it's really, really fascinating seeing that split.
Did you hear that? I heard that.
One of the most interesting things I find about monsters is the fact that most of the time they usually reflect some sort of horrible insecurity of humans. There's some sort of insecurity or some sort of fear that humans have that is reflected in the monsters that we make up in our society. That's what makes me so interested in monsters and creatures in history. And the initial tellings of werewolves is one of the best examples of that, in my opinion, with werewolves being used to pretty much explain every single mass murderer that we had in early ages of human times. I think it's really cool that werewolves exemplify this, that they are really like the shining standard for monsters that are an allegory for things in our society. But I think it's really interesting, and that's one of the reasons why I was kind of drawn to werewolves so much initially, was that they kind of tell a story. You can see throughout history the evolution of them and how they reflect consistently what we feared through different ages. In the Middle Ages it might have been mass murderers, but as time grew on, different allegories evolved for werewolves. And I think it's super cool. I just want to go on a bit of a tangent here, but I think it's really super cool how you can trace most monsters back to some sort of fear in our society. Vampires, kind of racist. At a glance, vampires might be significant of aristocracy and riches and all of that sort of stuff. And in many ways they were. But vampires, the vampire we know today, Bram Stoker's vampire, Nosferatu, Dracula, all that sort of stuff, is actually really harmful Jewish stereotypes. And that is super interesting to me. And it's really, really strange that consistently as a society, we're really, really good at making up monsters and creatures based off cultural fears. And it's extremely telling in such an interesting way, in such an interesting psychological way, how telling it can be, what we are afraid of in different times by the creatures that we make up. And also, it's super, super interesting how much staying power these creatures have in our societies. I remember being 7 and thinking about werewolves and being scared of them, but also super fascinated by werewolves. I remember wanting to write school like essays when I was like in primary school, and in elementary, wanting to write stories about werewolves, and I was never able to because they were considered something that was a bit too like violent and extreme for elementary school. But so one of the more niche, I guess, iterations or takings of werewolves is that they are representative of the working class. Werewolves, werewolves work very well as somewhat of propaganda for the working class back in the day. Again, as we've established, werewolves are a allegory for brutality and, men being secretly violent or evil in some respect. But that stereotype works really, really well for the upper class if you apply that to the working class peoples. If you, like working class people back in the day, back in medieval times, they might not have had access to stuff like baths and being able to, trim unibrows and trim nails, and they might have been very hairy, and, it works really, really well if you want to say, oh, well, there was a murder in this town, it was probably one of the farmers, it's probably one of the farmers who looks like a werewolf, let's kill him. For like systems like feudalism and for the upper class, that's a very beneficial concept. So that's one of the angles that you can take for werewolf allegories. Another very prolific and kind of more obvious allegory you get for werewolves is werewolves being a little bit fruity. Werewolves have more recently been adapted to be an allegory for queer people, for queerness. There's something really rings true about that obvious idea of like this person is persecuted in society and they have a part of them that they have to hide, a part that many people probably won't understand, that a lot of people see as evil. And that really, that kind of lines up with werewolves in a pretty direct way. And werewolves are quite a potent metaphor for, queerness. I think there's been a fair bit of media made in this sort of trope and concept, and I think it's really fitting, and I think it's also really pertinent to me personally, and probably part of the reason why I've found werewolves so personally relevant over the years. But I think it's really cool that werewolves can line up with so many allegories. Also, another really obvious one, and a very prolific one, being a teenager, puberty. This is very, very consistently a werewolf allegory. It shows up in all sorts of media. Literally like Ginger Snaps, Teen Wolf, literally every teenage werewolf movie from the 80s, which there's probably like 50 of them out there. There's a lot of werewolf movies where the werewolf is a teenager because it's such an easy allegory for puberty. Oh no, I'm growing hair in strange places. I'm getting bigger. I've got all this weird stuff going on. All of a sudden, I want to kill people. Maybe not that extreme, but, maybe you're jerking off a bit more during the day. You know what I'm saying? Like, werewolves, clearly, puberty, that fits. It's, Ginger Snaps is one of my favorite werewolf movies. That's a good movie if you want to check that one out. I think I'll talk about it later on this video, but I think, it's a very obvious allegory. It's a very potent one. It stood the test of the time in our society, and it makes sense why that shows up so much. And I think that's another fitting werewolf allegory. And this is something that kind of applies to all monsters, but I was reading about this earlier this year, reading about the overlap between the very, very big overlap between people who are neurodivergent and monsters, particularly werewolves and vampires. And a huge part of this relating to werewolves is that concept of being othered, feeling strange and feeling like there's a part of yourself that you have to hide from other people and that you have to mask parts of yourself. That really aligns with a lot of the autistic experience. If you want to take it even further with vampires and Dracula, that can also be very like resonant as like an autistic or ADHD person or just neurodivergent in general, in the sense that you might not like bright lights. You might want to be inside most of the day. You might feel othered. You might feel isolated, and you might be very introverted. And these are all kind of concepts that align with Dracula and also werewolves, lycanthropy. And I think this is one of the main things that drew me to werewolves when I was younger is initially I was very drawn to werewolves because they're badass and they're cool and they're Sigma. And, I remember looking a lot at werewolf images and history and stuff when I was a kid and being like, whoa, those are super sick. And I remember feeling very drawn to werewolves as a concept. And initially it was just because they were cool. But I think as I've grown older, I've realized that there's a deeper connection that lies within me and werewolves. And I think it's because a lot growing up and a lot in my teenage years, I felt very othered and I felt very on the outside of things. And I felt like there was really just strange parts of me that no one would understand. And I felt very weird and gross and kind of like a loser. And, it's kind of cool to be like, hey, maybe I'm just a werewolf. It makes it a lot easier to feel like a loser when, you can just be like, hey, maybe I'm just a super cool looking werewolf. I think that happened on a very subconscious level, but I think it's super cool how much monsters that were created, in the 15th century, years and years ago, can be very emotionally relevant to a teenager, that's growing up entire hemispheres away. I think that's super cool, and I think werewolves are super cool, and I'm really, really interested in werewolves, if you couldn't tell. Now, I'm going to cover some of my favorite werewolf media, because there's a lot out there, and there's a lot of bad, and there's a lot of good. Starting off with a banger, American Werewolf in London. If you haven't watched that movie, go watch it. It's a great horror comedy. It's a pretty strange movie. It's kind of silly and kind of weird. The VFX really haven't aged that good, but also they kind of have because they're practical effects. So it's kind of got the Jurassic Park thing going to it at a lesser extent, where the CGI isn't very good. There isn't CGI, I don't believe. But the effects that are there aren't that amazing because they're aged, but they are better than if it was CGI because it's practical effects and they're pretty cool. The werewolf design in that movie is super sick. I love it. It's pretty prolific. It's kind of seen all over the place and you just don't know until you've watched the movie that it's from there, but it's a really good movie. I think it's really funny. You should definitely check it out. And, it's just one of those classic, werewolfy, spooky 80s horror films that, I've said before that I really, really love. The Quarry. If you're looking for a really, really good video game, play The Quarry. The Quarry has one of my favorite iterations of werewolves, and this game really drew me in initially because it has an amazing soundtrack. The game opens with Moonlight by Ariana Grande, and all the songs in the game are actually werewolf puns. Like Bad Moon Rising is I think the Bad Moon Rising is the end of the game, and it's like Werewolf, Moonlight by Ariana Grande, Bad Moon Rising. There's a really underrated banger called Wolf Boy by I forget who, but that's the outro music. And there's just really, really good music, and there's really, really fun, cute little analogies for werewolves in the game. But the actual design of the werewolves in that game, I think, is super cool. I played through that game a bunch last year, and I really, really love how they did the werewolves in that game. Usually I don't like bald werewolves that are really human and kind of skin-like and they don't have fur. I don't like that very much. I think it's kind of weird and doesn't really fit the trope. But The Quarry did it really well, and I love the whole concept that they have of hereditary werewolves, where if you kill the werewolf that bit you, you're no longer a werewolf. Or if you kill the werewolf that bit the werewolf that bit you, you're no longer a werewolf, which I really like. And I think those are sort of really cool concepts to bring in. They make the story more rich because a lot of werewolf stories have already been told. So if you kind of take it from an angle of we have to kill the werewolf that bit me so that I can be normal, that's a more interesting story than just there's a werewolf out there killing people and the werewolf kills people and the story is over. You know what I mean? I think that makes it a lot more thrilling and it gets you way more invested in the characters, which I think is good because it is a choice-based game. It's a choose your own adventure, and I think you should go check out that game if you like choose your own adventures. If you liked Until Dawn, you'll like that game, so go play it. Wolfman, the original Wolfman, the old Universal horror monsters, was really cool as well. That's a very, very classic movie. The practical effects on that movie have kind of aged surprisingly well in my eyes. I think it looks better than Nosferatu did, considering that both of those movies were very old very old Universal horror movies, even though Nosferatu wasn't made by Universal, it was actually made illegally, but whatever. Old horror movies, in terms of those movies, they've all kind of aged weirdly individually, but I think they're really cool. I like a lot of those original horror movies. Wolfman is the swamp creature. Was it creature from the deep? Creature of the Black Lagoon? I forgot what it's called. But the swamp creature dude, the vampire one, of course, Bram Stoker's Dracula. All of these movies have aged really, really well in my eyes, and I think they're just super cool. I think they're really, really cool. And if you like werewolves, go check out Wolfman, because that's a cool movie. Teen Wolf, both the 80s movie with Michael J. Fox and the newer series. I like both a lot. I am kind of like, the newer series is really weird. I think it drops off after the third season. But I think like the first two seasons are kind of cool, and I think they ran out of story to tell, so they just started making up and adding stuff into the lore that didn't need to be there. But the first season was pretty cool. I like the concept of like an alpha werewolf, Sigma werewolf, alpha and omega and all that sort of stuff. Like, that's a kind of cool concept to add something more to the story. And I think werewolves. I think there was a really good swing at werewolf media. I think, it's personally nostalgic for me because I watched it while I was in high school, but it's kind of one of those things where like it does a lot of the basic werewolf stuff, but kind of in a more interesting and new way. And you know what? I like simple werewolf media, and that's the coolest form of werewolf in my opinion. Because in that show, like, yeah, he can't control when he turns on the full moon until the second season, but like when he's human, he is like super hearing and super fast, and he can like turn into a werewolf whenever he wants, and that's cool. I want to be like that. You know what I mean? I'd like to be like that. It's fucking sick. So I don't know. It's a cool iteration of werewolves. Teen Wolf, check it out if you want to. The movie with Michael J. Fox is also really fun as well. I just like old werewolf media. It's really fun, really silly. A lot of the time it's very, very silly. So speaking of 80s and 90s werewolf media, all of the many werewolf Goosebumps books, Werewolf Skin, and the it's like a Werewolf on the Lake or something. I forget what it's called, but that's a good one. I read those both as a kid and I loved them. I love Goosebumps. They do like really, really good like kids horror. I used to love Goosebumps so much as a kid, and the cartoon was also pretty cool as well. Not the cartoon, but like the live action show was pretty cool as well, even though it hasn't aged very well. But yeah, I just that werewolf cover from when he's on like the lake has just really stuck with me. It's like visually what I think of werewolves. Ever since I was a kid, that cover has really just stuck in my mind. So personally to me it's really relevant, and I think it's just a cool book. Ginger Snaps, I talked about this one earlier, but Ginger Snaps is a movie that kind of goes into like the allegory of werewolves from like a teenage perspective. It's very much like a teen puberty movie. It's also a really cool movie. It's a very, very like weird puberty movie. But it's just a classic werewolf movie in my opinion. It's underrated. It was very small budget, very small production. In terms of like how much, I don't think I could even find the budget. I remember Googling it. I don't think I could find the budget online, but it didn't seem like I had a massive budget, but I think they did a really good job of what they had. It's a very classic, like 2000s teen movie. It has a lot of cool werewolf tropes. It has this cool character who's like kind of like a drug dealer schizo dude, but he knows all about werewolves and he's like super weird, and I resonated with him a lot in a lot of ways. And I don't know, it's just a really creative, fun take at werewolves, and it has a really youthful vibe to it. It reminds me a lot of Jennifer's Body, if you've ever seen that movie. I love that movie. Panic in the Disco and the soundtrack, and like, it's Jennifer's Body, man. It's a classic. It's a classic teen horror movie. It's so much fun. But yeah, it reminds me a lot of that. If you've seen that, go check out Ginger Snaps, because it's a really fun movie. I don't know where you can find it online. I found it online. F movies, 1, 2, 3 movies. But yeah, I found it online. You can find it somewhere, I'm sure. It's a fun movie, and if you like Jennifer's Body, definitely check it out. Finally, I wanted to comment on one of my favorite songs by the Cramps, I Was a Teenage Werewolf. That was like one of my top songs from last year, just because it's super silly, and I love the Cramps. I love the weird stuff they do in their songs, the weird like screams and yells and shit. I love classic, or like very classic, like goth music to me. I don't know if you'd call that punk, maybe, but to me it's goth music, and I love the Cramps. I think they're super cool. And that song just has such a fun style to it. It's so kooky and weird, and like they put so much energy. There's so much energy in the performance on that song, and it plays into the whole like, I'm a werewolf, I'm like sick and fucked up and demented. I like, I can't get too close to my girlfriend because if I do, I might eat her. Like that classic like teen werewolf stuff. So it's fun. And I think it's a really cool song, and I love the Cramps, and it was one of my top songs from last year. So I just had to throw it into the video and just say like, the Cramps, ooh, fun. But yeah, werewolves. Kind of weird. Really, really weird. But in conclusion, I wanted to say that I really care about werewolves. I think werewolves are really cool. I think they shine a big bit of light onto how we view ourselves in society. I want to make more videos on monsters because I really like talking about this sort of stuff. But I think like werewolves in terms of like allegories are super interesting. I think they're super fun creatures. I think the different media and the different iterations of them, there's something for everyone. You can find a different way the story has been told so many times over. And I think they're just kind of cool. They're just kind of fucking sick, right? I think it's really funny that all the Sigma memes have been coming out about werewolves over the last like 5 years. Not 5 years, I thought the last couple of years, but I don't know. I just really love werewolves. It always kind of, I feel kind of silly saying that I like them so much, because like, also I remember I was doing mushrooms one day with my friends, and I was like, "Whoa, guys! I think there's like a different kind of attractiveness for every sort of male," and I posited the fact that there's vampire pretty, werewolf pretty, and elf pretty, all while on mushrooms, and I think, unironically, the concept of referring to myself as werewolf pretty made me feel better about my body, which is really funny, but also kind of sweet, but also fucking hilarious. So yeah, werewolves have kind of been like a cool thing to me my entire life, and I'm super happy that I got to talk about them. And yeah, go watch some werewolf media. Get into werewolves, man. If you liked this video, get into werewolves, dude. Okay, well, that's pretty much all my thoughts that I have on this, so see you later, I guess.